welcome to the Let's Talk Kids Health Facebook Live Show, episode 20. I'm Dr. Narissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and blogger of Let's Talk Kids Health. The concept of this show, as you know, is to share information about behavioral health and wellness for children and families everywhere. Each week, I plan to bring you topics and guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. Now remember, this episode was pre-recorded, but you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and my guest and I will look through and make sure that we answer them at a later time. Please make sure you drop the hashtag live or hashtag replay so that we can make sure that we answer every question that comes across. So the replay obviously is available whenever, and so if you're watching this and want to share it with someone else, please do so. And if you don't want to miss future episodes or maybe check out some past ones, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, and follow my blog Facebook page, Let's Talk Kids Health. Okay, so now to this week's guest. Let's welcome Dr. Krupa Playforth. Dr. Playforth is a pediatrician in Northern Virginia with a special interest in healthcare education. She completed her undergraduate training at Harvard, went to Vanderbilt for medical school, and then went on to complete her pediatrics residency at Georgetown University. She currently resides in Northern Virginia with her family. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to finally have you on. Just for the viewers and those who are listening, I have been following Dr. Playforth on Instagram. She's got a great feed there and profile. And so I'm going to ask you to just share a little bit about how the pediatrician mom came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I had been a pediatrician for a few years before I had children. I did everything by the book. And then I had my kids, and it completely changed my approach to pediatric medicine. You know, the concept of a one size fits all approach, just parenting is just not that simple, right? So I'm a type A, rule following, a little bit anxious mom, and it was hard to accept that there are so many approaches to solving the same parenting problems. So ultimately, I had been kind of thinking about this for a few years, and I really wanted to address that, this concept that parenting is just not black and white. There's a lot of nuance to it. And then now with the internet and just how interconnected we are and how much information is out there, the internet is not a well-regulated space. And I wanted to try to find a way to enable parents to get the information that they need to make parenting decisions without misinformation. And to talk about evidence-based recommendations, but also just the perspective that parenting is nuanced, just to kind of help equip parents to kind of confidently navigate the complexities of raising tiny people.
Well, as you said, there are no rules to the internet, and so anybody can post anything. So I love that you're using your voice and your brand to cut through that noise and give parents the information that they need.
There's so much information out there, and it's not just controversial topics
Yeah.
like sleep training or vaccines or things. It's even standard topics like when you introduce solids and how you introduce solids. People need information. They need accurate, reliable information.
Yeah, yeah. And your story is very similar to mine. I mean, I think I'm a behavioral pediatrician, and this is what I do is doing parenting advice and running parent training, and it can be overwhelming.
Oh
So parents
yeah. Oh
need
yeah.
parents need to know where, to find reliable information. So I love that.
Thank
Well,
you.
so let's get started because, we're going to talk about the fourth trimester. And, that is a relatively newer term. And I thought before we just kind of launch in that we should at least define that so that we're all on the same page. So, what is meant by the fourth trimester?
So the term the fourth trimester was coined first by Dr. Harvey Karp from The Happiest Baby on the Block. And his concept is that human babies are born too soon, developmentally. So our brains are so big and so well developed that probably we should be in utero for another additional 3 months. But we're born early because of the size of our brains. And that means that the first 3 months of life are almost like, it's almost in some ways like you still have a fetus. The things that comfort them are the things that mimic the womb.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of it can be very difficult to manage those first 3 months of life. They're not really necessarily socializing with you quite as much, obviously, and there's a lot of pressure. Not to mention all the kind of hormones and sleep deprivation and all of that stuff that happens too. So the fourth trimester is a term that we use to describe that first 3 months of life.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember that fog. And sometimes I don't want to remember that
Yep,
time. Yep.
yep. And nobody
Yeah.
talked about it before, you know? I don't even think as a pediatrician I knew how hard that time was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I tell families all the time, that parenting is such a humbling experience. And it's a combination of all those things that you mentioned, the hormones, the lack of sleep, just the newness of it all. And even as pediatricians, we still
Oh,
need
yeah.
we still
Oh,
need
yeah.
the support too. So,
We're
yeah.
still parents. We're just
Yeah.
like any other parent in some
That's
ways.
right. That's right. That's right. Well, so, as a pediatrician, we are tasked to screen for certain things, and
Hmm.
especially that first several months when uh, a woman is adjusting to her role as a mother, right?
Yep.
Why is it important to identify postpartum anxiety or depression in this critical time period? And maybe you can step us back and define what those are if you want to, and then go into that.
So, postpartum depression is it's depression. It's a mood disorder, and postpartum anxiety is a disorder as well. I mean, very significant anxiety that we see in that postpartum period. It's not just in the first 3 months of life, although that's often when it's picked up, but it can happen anytime. Even up to a year after your baby is born. I see some amounts of kind of post weaning depression. Some of it is influenced by the hormonal changes. Some of it is influenced by sleep deprivation and just kind of the changes in pressure that you face when you are suddenly completely responsible for this new being that most you love, that you want to do the best for, and adjusting your entire life around this little being. I think postpartum depression, we don't really fully know the rates of postpartum depression, but what we do know is that even up to 70 or 80% of women will experience some degree of a mood episode after their babies are born. At a minimum, it might be something called the baby blues,
Mhm.
but then postpartum depression is an even more severe form of that. I don't think that I knew how prevalent the baby blues were. Um, but if you talk to people, to other moms, I think that you will find that that feeling of overwhelm and I mean true depression can be more common than we think it. The reported rate is probably, I would say, between 10 and 20%, but I think that's only taking a sliver of the picture into account.
Yeah, for sure. And I've actually seen that's absolutely the ballpark, but it can even be rates of 50 to 60% if families are from lower socioeconomic
Yes, yes.
backgrounds, to just this additional stress of poverty and what they're
Hmm.
facing can be very challenging.
Not to mention then adding something like the pandemic on top of
Ugh.
it, because you don't have the same support system.
Yeah, I mean, so that raises a really important question, I think. And then we'll get back to the other one was, with the pandemic, and given that we have to social distance, but yet babies are like such a life event that people want to see and meet the new
Hmm.
baby, right?
Yeah.
But I bet it's been hard. You've been fielding questions about, like, is it safe to have people around my newborn baby? And what's the advice there?
So it's changed over the course of the pandemic in some ways, right?
Hmm.
When we had no idea about how COVID was transmitted, it was this new virus. Nobody knew what the impact would be in children. Initially, yeah, everybody was essentially locked down. So if you had a new mom who was expecting family to come and support and be there to kind of help them with that adjustment, suddenly they were isolated.
Hmm.
Even the new moms groups that a lot of people do and attend in their during their maternity leave were shut down. Now, at this point, I think what we know about COVID is fairly reassuring in the pediatric population, although those younger kids, the young infants, are still they're just still more vulnerable. Any illness is potentially going to impact them some more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also think that the other illnesses that are still out there, we're starting to see some rates climb up. For example, RSV. Um, so my advice at this point is, particularly in the first 2 months of life, you still kind of want to err on the side of caution. You know, now that we have this vaccine that's fantastic and effective, everybody's sort of using that as the sign that, okay, we can just go back to normal. And in some ways that's true, but all of the other things that cause illness in young babies could still be there. And we don't have vaccines for all those things.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a vaccine for RSV, for example. And so I tend to still recommend minimizing visitors, good hand hygiene, etc. Just kind of being a little bit extra cautious in those first couple months before they've built up their reserve.
Yeah, so I can only sympathize with the families that have had babies at this, time period because again, it's such a hard transition because you're sleepy, you're trying to just figure out the newborn's cries and what it means and,
Mm-hmm.
just even getting the hang of breastfeeding if you're going to do that or how to make bottles, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's such a learning curve, a steep learning curve.
absolutely.
But, getting back to the original question about like why is it important to identify postpartum anxiety or depression during this time period? Like, what are some of the negative consequences if it goes undetected?
So the negative consequences can be obviously to the mother, right?
Hmm.
We know that depression and mood disorders generally can impact your physical health, your well-being. It can impact your ability to bond with your child, your impact to recover from. I mean, childbirth is an event and it's hard on your body. It can impact your ability to physically recover from that. It can also impact your relationship with your partner, your relationship with your child, or with any other children that are there. Um, Sometimes we find that with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, that the ability of mom to just really enjoy the baby is diminished. I mean, and that bonding is a big part of what's important about that first year of life, especially in an environment where other social bonding is not so much there. So the impact of these postpartum mood disorders is very, very wide ranging. I think that there's a lot of pressure for moms to kind of portray that they are doing very well. I've been very surprised. I didn't recognize this before, but I've had moms reach out to me on social media and say that they make extra efforts immediately in the postpartum period when they're going to their pediatrician to look extra put together, even if they're struggling, just because they are so afraid that any sign of weakness or instability is going to make their pediatrician report them, take away their baby. And that breaks my heart, right? Because our goals are the same. We want those babies to be healthy, and we would, unless we are really worried about the safety and welfare of that child,
Hmm.
what we want to do is provide resources and help rather than jumping into, reporting a family.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so glad you said that. Again, you heard it here. Pediatricians want to support moms, new moms, and help
Yeah.
you through that. But unfortunately, there are those, those sound bites or those isolated stories. I mean, even just as of, several years ago, where moms are being called, CPS, Child Protective Services, are called in those instances, and that just shows that we have a lot more education to do.
Yeah,
We really
absolutely.
do.
Pediatricians, I mean, we if we ever have to call CPS, those are really traumatic, for us too, right? Because ultimately we just want the best for the child. I don't know any pediatrician that calls without having really, really thought about it and debated and sometimes talked with colleagues, to make sure that they're making the right call.
Hmm. Yeah. And with that, I think the message is that when pediatricians identify a mom who is suffering from postpartum anxiety or depression, there is help. There is hope.
There's
There's
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's also the kind of worry from a lot of moms, I think, that if they take medication for some of these conditions,
Mm,
that's somehow going to impact the baby, especially if they're nursing, if they're breast breastfeeding, then they're worried that some of those medications will transfer into the breast milk. Though many of the medications that have been studied, almost all the medications that have been studied for standard postpartum depression or anxiety, are safe to take, and treating yourself helps your baby.
hmm.
It's just sort of a different, you have to just sort of conceptualize it as not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength.
Yeah, for sure. I mean that's so important to say out loud. And there's been other studies that have shown consistently that when mothers or parents who have depression are treated, when I say treated, I don't necessarily mean medication, but even
Exactly.
therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
those the positive effect it has on the bonding and the interconnectedness with the parent and the child just improve dramatically,
Mm-hmm.
even just
Yeah.
doing that. So, yeah, that's so important. So, thank you for highlighting that. Well, I'm wondering if you could share some of your tips then to moms for self-care. I mean, because, this is such a, I just remembering not being able to go shower or, all those
Right,
different things,
right.
right? So, what are some of your favorite tips to give to parents?
I think that recognizing that self care is care for the family. Self care is care for your baby is sort of the biggest thing, right? We all have different ways that we need to fill our cups. And for some of us, that is, you know, doing some exercise. Some of us, it's meditation, taking a nap. I don't love to think about self care as things like showering, although, some people might,
Uh-huh.
just because those are routine things. But whatever it takes for you, just carving out that time is important. And I think that a lot of moms feel like they have to kind of do everything, right? You have to be a powerhouse, and you feel guilty if you're not, you don't have the house impeccable, and the baby isn't a good baby, and you haven't kind of got everything down, home cooked meals, all that stuff. I think just reaching out, outsourcing things where you need to, and telling people if you need help. Any mother, I think, that's been through this kind of understands. And sometimes what you need is just for somebody else to clean the house, or to order the food, or to have, freezer meals. It does, whatever it is, just recognizing that self care is care for the family,
Yeah.
whatever that is for you.
I love that. That should be sort of the highlight from this episode is self-care is care for the family. I love that. And so can you tell us a little bit more, like what other like stories or advice have you heard from parents about the fourth trimester? Any myths or any misconceptions about it?
I think that very few people, now that the fourth trimester is more in discussion,
Yeah.
we are, I think more moms and dads are going into it with their eyes open, expecting it to be hard. With that said, even when you expect it to be hard, I don't think anybody really fully understands how hard it can be. And there's a lot of preparation, a lot of information. Sometimes I find that parents are attending groups and education sessions and things like that even before they have their baby. I think the biggest takeaway, or the biggest thing that I have learned from parents, is this fallacy of control.
Mm.
So it even happens during pregnancy. So, you're pregnant, and you have a birth plan, right? You have a vision of how this whole thing is going to go. And then you have a baby that has an opinion too. And sometimes your birth plan just does not go as expected. And I think that can be very traumatic unless you can sort of understand that you are not the only person involved in those decisions.
Hmm.
And that's true of birth and pregnancy. That's true of all the other things. Eating, how you feed your baby, breastfeeding versus formula, sleep, how that's going to go. We all have a vision of how we want things to go. And then we have this human being that has their own personality and their own opinions, and they are relevant. So I think the sort of understanding that part of learning to parent is letting go and recognizing that your control is only so much. if you can learn that early, I think that will save you a lot of grief down the line.
Oh goodness. Yeah. I mean, as you were talking, I mean it sort of is reminiscent of things that I often counsel parents on, like the shoulds, right? Or like
Mm-hmm.
that ideal parent that is portrayed in in the media out there, and there's this perfect parent thing that we
Mm-hmm.
all say that we have to live up to. But it just, life is messy, it's
Mm-mm.
complicated,
Yeah.
and and really we're setting that bar for ourselves. And if
Mm-hmm.
we set this impossible bar, we're just going to be frustrated the whole entire time.
Exactly. And you think that every decision is the end, is sort of the be all and end all decision, right? Like, what crib do I buy?
Wait a
Or,
minute. Wait. You mean it's not?
down the line, you won't even remember. And your child will probably turn out okay.
Yeah. 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 But you're right. Absolutely. Every single decision in that first, several months, you're like, "Oh, it has to be this way. It's got to look this way,"
I need to make the right decision.
Yeah.
And just my hope is that understanding that often there is no right decision and there's lots of right ways to do things can take the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so can you tell us, for those who are watching, can you tell us a little bit more about like where to find you and what are some of the topics that you talk about
I
on your feed?
Yeah, I would love to. So, I have a website, thepediatricianmom.com, and I write some blog articles on there. And then I can also be found on Facebook and Instagram with the same handle, The Pediatrician Mom. I like to talk about all sorts of parenting things. So, especially if people send me topics. So recently there's been a lot of stuff about COVID and the
Hmm.
vaccine and masking in kids and whether or not, what you do if you have like a child that's too young to mask, what you do if your child is too young to have a vaccine, and how to kind of approach summer plans. But then I also like to talk about routine parenting things. I find that I get a lot of questions about toddler behavior, about sleep.
Hmm.
Sleep is a big topic. And also about eating and feeding and picky eating, but also how to introduce solids. I am a big fan of the concept of baby led feeding, but it's the same thing. Baby led feeding works for some kids and it doesn't work for others. I had a child, I was super gung ho with my oldest about baby led feeding, and she just did not take to it. And then my second took to it like gangbusters. So I worked recently with a pediatric allergist and a registered dietitian, and a recipe writer and an infant feeding specialist, and we put together like an online program and a book on baby-led feeding, not just how to do it, but also some recipes. Um, so those are the kinds of things that you can find on my feed.
Oh, wow. So, just to clarify, for those folks who've maybe not heard that term, baby-led feeding, what does that mean?
So it's sometimes called baby-led weaning, which I think is a misnomer because it it puts weaning at the forefront, and that's not the concept. So over the generations, we've sort of moved towards introducing babies to solids using purees.
Hmm.
And then probably in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a movement away from that where we start giving babies finger foods right away at 6 months. There's a lot of there's a lot of worry about it. The concept of purees are maybe less likely to cause them to choke. In fact, the data does not show that to be the case. There's no increased likelihood of choking with introducing with finger foods versus purees. But what we find is allowing your baby to have finger food and focusing more on a family meal time, um, focusing more on everybody eating the same food and modeling good eating behavior, intuitive eating behavior, responsive feeding. These things then translate to improved eating down the line as well. With the increased obesity and eating disorders and all the things that we see in much, much older kids and adults, the hope is that emphasizing intuitive eating patterns early hopefully then translates to better eating patterns down the line too.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I'm a big fan, but it does, as I said, it doesn't work in everybody. And if you start with purees, it does not mean that your child is, is going to have problems down the line at all. But also, I think in today's day and age, it's very hard to plan meals and plan recipes and introduce as much of a diverse palette and variety early on in life as you want to. And there's a lot of pressure, and it kind of comes right back to that mom guilt feeling, right? So
Yes.
the book provides recipes that the entire family can enjoy and has some plant-based kind of emphasis too, so that we are making sure that every child is catered to. But the recipes are very simple
Mhm.
and hopefully take some of the pressure off of figuring out how to feed your child solids.
Yes, yes. And I'm glad you said simple because, again, I'm thinking of the moms who are tired and they just don't have a lot of
Yeah.
time. So it's even better that it's simple. So,
We really wanted simple. We wanted to focus on recipes that maybe, somebody who's not confident or someone who's not a chef,
uh-huh.
something any standard person can kind of handle in the kitchen, but it's still tasty and could be enjoyed by the entire family. So you're not making a separate meal for your baby compared to everybody else.
Right, right. Which is important because you don't want to fall into that trap early.
No.
Well, so thank you so much for spending the time, Dr. Playforth, and sharing with the viewers and the audience all this information and how to find you. Because again, like I said, what you are doing is really needed, and I love sort of just having seen you progress in your journey and being able to engage and get that audience. And now you've just got such a following, so it's so exciting to see that.
I am thrilled. This took off more than I expected. It's a silver lining of the pandemic for me personally.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for having me. And if there's anybody that ever has questions, they're welcome to reach out.
Right. And I will make sure to include all of those links so that you can connect with Dr. Playforth. Now that you've seen this, it'll be in the show notes on the YouTube video. And so please make sure to follow her on all the social media platforms. You won't regret it. She's got a lot of great information. So,
Thank you.
of course. So next week's special guest is Jeannie Marugo, where we talk healthy eating in babies.
Well, that kind of goes along with what we were
It
just talking
really
about. That's
does.
great.
It really does. She opened up Cafe Baby to Go here in Indianapolis, so I'm really excited to have her on Thursday, June 10th. And again, if you have any ideas for future speakers or guests, please make sure to send me an email at letstalkkidshealth@gmail.com. Drop me a comment below or just message me on social media. And remember, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, to be alerted every time I go live, and follow my blog Facebook page. Again, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode.